Lev's brother, Joseph, had a leg injury prior to the war, therefore, he was not drafted. He lived in Lev's room with his wife, Zina, and their 3 children. The entire male population was drafted to the war, and Joseph was one of not too many men left to work. He held a high position at the military plant in Leningrad, and the job helped him and his family survive the Leningrad blockade. Zina stayed home taking care of her small children. When the doorbell rang, Zina put her baby into the crib and opened the front door. A pregnant young woman in a military uniform, with a small suitcase in one hand and a pillow in another, smiled at her. "Hello. I'm Betty, Lev's fiancée." "What?" "Lev has a fiancée, but it's not you." "That's for sure," Zina said with confidence. "Yes, it's me. I'm Betty. He told me to stay here with you." "You are Zina, right?" "Listen, girl. My home is not a shelter. I have nothing to eat for the homeless like you. I have 3 children to feed. So just go away, and look for food and shelter someplace else." She shut the door. Betty rang the bell again, hoping that it was just a misunderstanding. Zina opened the door in a swift motion. "What word don't you understand?" "Go away," she yelled. "But I have no other place to go," Betty said, quietly. "Lev told me that I have to go to his place. If you don't go away, I'll call the police." Zina yelled. "He never told me about you, slut." Betty was standing in front of the closed door for some time in complete shock. "Who could take care of me better than my family?" She heard her own voice. She went outside. Where could she go? Her Aunt Jenna lived in Leningrad, but she was the last person Betty would want to ask for help, recalling her anti-Semitic husband. "After all, I'm a hero," Betty thought. "I have a medal for bravery." And she went to the army committee. It was a cold, windy day in April 1945. Public transportation didn't run, and Betty had to walk a long distance to the army committee. "Betty, you don't have to go." She remembered as the general doctor tried to make her stay with him. "You have so many friends here. Stay with us. We'll take care of you here. Leningrad is ruined. You have nobody there to take care of you." Betty walked, moving her legs heavily while supporting her stomach. She didn't feel well. Her headache started to harass her again. "Your frequent headaches, and the injuries you sustained could affect your baby." The general doctor's voice was so clear. I should have listened to him. Betty thought, crying, but it was too late for regrets. There were a lot of people at the army committee. She stood in a long line, waiting for her turn, supporting her huge stomach with her hands. Nobody offered her a seat or to cut in line. "I came from a field hospital," Betty said when it was finally her turn. She put a document in front of a commander. "I need a place to stay until my husband comes back from the war." A commander took a long mean look at the 2 rows of medals on her jacket that Betty proudly wore, and then his glance slid to her huge stomach. "Show me your marriage certificate," he said. "I don't have one." "We didn't." "Your husband," he smirked. "You are lying. Go, find your husbands, and ask them for help. Do you remember which one of them gave you what medal?" "I need a place to live," she started again, but he already was speaking to the next person in line. "I'm a surgical nurse and I just returned from the front," she insisted. Dismissed, he ordered. He was a higher rank, so Betty couldn't argue with him. It was already dark. Betty roamed the city the entire day, looking for the army committee and trying to figure out what to do, and she still had no place to go. She was embarrassed and exhausted. She had no other choice, so she went to Aunt Jenna, feeling very uneasy. Jenna lived in a small room of a 6-room apartment that was located on the 6th floor of a building without an elevator. Her husband, Nick, was a member of the Communist Party, worked for the KGB, and was a real swine. A neighbor opened the door, studied Betty's stomach for a long time, and then asked, "Want to eat something?" No. I mean, yes, but I'm looking for my Aunt Jenna." "Jenna? Oh. Come in." "Jenna," she yelled. "There is a pregnant woman at the door for you." Nick walked out of the room, and Jenna walked after him. "Who are you?" he asked blankly. "Betty." "You? Oh, dear. Come in. Come in." Jenna walked Betty into the room. Nick followed them and shut the door. Depression and misery ruled this apartment. 5 single women lived in other small rooms. They survived the Leningrad blockade, but all had lost their husbands and children either to starvation or the war. They were different ages, but the grief and uphill struggles made them look much the same, with no age, no identity, and no future. Even though the apartment was overcrowded, it felt like death ruled there. It was silent and cold. Betty felt very uncomfortable because Nick didn't want her there, but she had no other choice, so she stayed. It was late April of 1945. Betty woke up and screamed due to a sharp pain in her stomach. Jenna and the other women walked her down the stairs from the 6th floor and all the way to the hospital. Betty delivered a little girl in terrible pain and inconceivable complications due to continuous starvation and inhuman conditions during the pregnancy. "Are you sure it's a girl?" Betty asked with disappointment. "Yes. I'm positive," a nurse said, though she didn't smile. "The baby is very small and weak. She won't survive," she added. "Also, it's for the best. You are not even married." Betty didn't answer and cried. However, one day passed after another, but the baby girl didn't give up, and despite all the dark predictions, in a week, the mother with the little baby girl were released from the hospital. Betty came back to Jenna's place. The first night was tough. The baby cried non-stop, and nobody was able to sleep. In the morning, Jenna and the other women left for work one by one. Nick stayed home. As soon as the front door closed behind the last neighbor, he gathered Betty's things. "You have to leave, now." "Uncle Nick, but where can I go?" "Why do I care, huh? Go back to where you came from. Go. Go." He threw her suitcase and the pillow out the front door, pushed her out, and shut the door. Betty stood with the baby in her hands in front of the closed door for some time, hoping that he would change his mind. She knocked, but he didn't open the door. She picked up her suitcase and pillow and slowly walked down the stairs. She stepped outside into a small enclosure surrounded by buildings. It was the beginning of May, a wet and windy day. When Betty left the courtyard, the strong, cold wind made her come back. She had nowhere to go, and no strength to walk because she hadn't recovered completely from the labor. Betty remembered the neighbor, Vicky, asking her, "Want to eat something?" when she appeared at the front door of Jenna's apartment. Vicky was her last hope. Betty went back into the building entrance and sat on the stairs on the lower platform, but the smell of urine that came from under the staircase was unbearable. In a few minutes, Nick stormed down the stairs. "Don't even think of coming back with your bastard." He spoke rudely and slammed the entrance door. "I could sit here the entire day, and nobody will see me. I'd better sit outside, so that maybe somebody will take me in. It's impossible to breathe here." Betty thought in despair. She went outside again, sat on her suitcase, placed the pillow on her knees, put the baby on the pillow, and cried. The baby cried, but the young mother couldn't do anything about it. It was too cold to undress the baby. Also, she didn't have any extra diapers. The baby was dirty and wet. Betty was hungry, and the baby was hungry too. She cried and then fell asleep, then woke up and cried again. Betty sat on her suitcase the entire day, until the sun went down. People started coming back home from work. Nick came home first. "You are still sitting here. Don't even think of coming back to my room," he said, smirking, and disappeared behind the front door. Aunt Jenna came first. "Betty! What are you doing here? Are you crazy?" she almost yelled at her. "Uncle Nick kicked me out," Betty said. "He's a son of a bitch." "I'll be back," she promised and ran home, leaving Betty with the baby outside. Betty waited for half an hour, but Jenna was not coming to rescue her. A neighbor, Mary, came home. She approached Betty. "Hey! What are you doing here?" Betty didn't answer, but just cried. Mary put her hands on Betty's head. "God! You've got a fever. Come with me." But Betty was not able to get up. She was too sick. Vicky came close. "Take the baby. Let's get her inside." Mary took charge. "Mary, what happened?" "I think Nick kicked her out. It's so much like him." They helped Betty to get up and almost carried her back into the building, all the way up to the 6th floor. They entered the apartment, as Nick walked out of his room and glanced at the women. "You bastard," Mary whispered in disgrace. "Shut up." Vicky tried to calm her down. They walked Betty into Mary's room and closed the door. "Are you crazy?" Vicky whispered. "You want to end up in Siberia?" "He's a bastard." Mary was emotional. "Shut the hell up. He'll hear you." The other 3 women came and helped to take care of Betty and her child. Those women had had families and children, but now they had nobody to care for. All the men died, leaving widows without any hope of finding love, nor a child, but only for despair. Betty and her little baby were a bright light in the hopelessly dark tunnel of their misery. They were ready to give away anything for a chance to hold the tiny baby. It was a miracle, and they would never let it die. They didn't talk too much, being afraid of Nick. To them, he had all the power in the world. The rooms in the apartment were too small to accommodate the mother with the baby permanently, but there was a closet in the kitchen that was filled with firewood for the stove. The women removed the wood, placed it in every empty space in the apartment, cleaned the closet, scared mice into their holes, and brought all they could find to make up a bed for the mother and her baby inside the closet. They searched through their little things and found pieces of cloth to wrap the baby in, an extra pillow, and a throw. They found medications for Betty, and soon she rested comfortably in the kitchen closet with the dry and fed baby right next to her. "What's your baby's name?" Mary asked. "I don't know. We expected a boy," Betty said. "I never thought about a girl's name. Lev wanted a name that started with an A. Then, we'll call her Anna, if it's all right with you." "Sure," Betty replied simply. "Who was Anna?" "She was my daughter," Mary answered. "She starved to death during the blockade." A teardrop hung in her eye for a few seconds, but she didn't let it out. "I wish your Anna lives a happy and healthy life." "Thank you, Mary." At night, Jenna brought some food, shamefully hiding her eyes. "Nick doesn't mind, as long as it's not happening in our room," she said. "I'm so sorry, Betty." "That's okay. I understand." Betty and Anna lived in the closet for another very difficult 9 months. The baby got sick often. There was no running water in the kitchen, so Betty had to walk up and down the 6-story building to bring it from the river. She had to find and bring wood to heat the water. It was hard to find medication and food, and every obstacle in life was a huge challenge. However, she never complained. After all, she was a soldier and a nurse. She was always thankful for all she had, and appreciated being alive. Soon after World War II, on the heels of the Nazi genocide, the dark period so-called the Black Years began. Stalin started his mission of exterminating the Jewish people using systematic anti-Jewish propaganda to turn public opinion against Jews. He choreographed and prepared a careful program. Stalin invented crimes supposedly committed by Jews, and these crimes were so terrible that they could only be punished by death. In January 1953, a new article, entitled "Doctor's Plot," was published, accusing Jewish doctors of planning to kill and poison top communist leaders. Stalin's program produced mass hysteria. The atmosphere in the apartment where Betty and Anna lived changed dramatically. All the women who were so friendly with Betty suddenly started to treat her with silence. "You are a Jewish nurse." Nick spoke to Betty, walking into the kitchen. "Are you planning to poison me too? Stop harassing her." Jenna yelled at her husband, but he cursed, slapping her face. "You both deserve to be sent to Siberia." He growled with anger. "I would have more space in the room without you." Jenna had no place to go, so he tolerated her nasty anti-Semite husband, though, luckily, she found a place for Betty and Anna. It was a room in an apartment that belonged to an old Georgian woman. Her name was Vera. In her youth, Vera was a stunning beauty. Men fell for her magnificence and extravagance. Even though beauty was the only thing she had, it was enough for a wealthy young count from St. Petersburg to fall in love with her. They got married and had 2 sons. The count had a beautiful palace in the center of St. Petersburg. The rooms of the palace were luxurious, with large, specially designed mosaic stained glass windows, 15-foot colored marble columns, beautiful parquet, and exclusively painted ceilings. It was decorated with priceless art and rich furnishings. Even though the count was very wealthy, he was against the Russian Tsar and helped the communist revolutionaries. When the communist government took power, he had to surrender a part of his palace. However, they made an exception for him and let him keep a 3-room apartment in his palace. Also, the Soviet government didn't care much about the art. Therefore, the count was able to preserve all his priceless paintings, and they covered the walls of his apartment entirely. The count died before the war, and Vera inherited all his belongings. Vera spoke with a heavy Georgian accent. When she was young, this accent suited her very well. When she became a widow, the accent made her a stranger among Russians, but she had 2 grown-up sons and could care less about people's prejudices. When the war started, her sons were drafted and never came back. They were killed. Vera managed to survive the Leningrad blockade. However, she didn't have anything to live for. She was old, lonely, and full of hate. Now, she lived in her huge 3-room apartment alone. All the other rooms of the palace were overcrowded. Every room was occupied by a family with 2 or 3 generations. The neighbors didn't like Vera, being very jealous, and she couldn't stand them either. Vera was not a Jew, but since she was different, people hated her the same as they hated all the Jews. During the blockade bombing, the stained glass mosaic got broken, and Vera didn't have any means to install new glass. The cold, pitiless winter was coming, and she needed firewood. She tried to sell some of her priceless paintings that were still hanging on the walls of her apartment, but was not able to find a customer. She decided to share her apartment with somebody in exchange for glass and firewood. Betty was very happy to have finally found a place of her own. She went to the army committee again and asked for window glass and firewood, presenting them her medals of honor. This time, they granted her what she asked for, and Betty and Anna moved into one of Vera's rooms. Betty hoped for a better future, but Vera didn't give her a chance. She had suffered from her loneliness for such a long time, and was so angry at life and people in general for her fate that she had gotten accustomed to her condition. This gorgeous, young, energetic mother with a little baby irritated Vera terribly. She was so upset with her misery that she was not capable of taking advantage of the life that had entered her apartment, and instead of enjoying it, she had a very bad attitude. The entrances to the bathroom and the kitchen were in the corridor, and to get there, Betty had to cross the living room. That was Vera's living room, and she spent her entire time there. It was an unpleasant experience watching a young mother walking in and out of her room, carrying her stuff around, preparing food, and taking care of her baby, who always made noise. Vera was utterly irritated and grew annoyed. She burst into hysteria at the end of the first day. "I want peace and quiet. Don't walk in and out all day long. Stay in your room. If you want to get out, you have to ask permission. Understood?" Betty was shocked. "I can't ask you for permission every time," she said. "I have too many things to take care of." "Then shut your door when you come out. Your bastard baby is too loud." "What did you say?" Betty was furious. "You heard me. Don't you ever use that word again. You know nothing about me and my baby." "I know enough. Do you even know who the father is, or were there too many of them in the army?" Vera smirked. "Yes, there were too many of them who loved me dearly, but you are not capable of understanding it because all you did during the war was sit in your apartment guarding your priceless paintings and waiting until it was all over. What do you know about me? You bitch. I lost both my boys at war. What do you know about any of this? Get out." Vera lost her temper. "I hope you don't mean it," Betty replied. The dispute was interrupted by the sound of glass breaking. A rock flew into the living room through the window. Both women startled, and a sudden heavy silence hung in the air. Betty picked up the rock. It was wrapped in a piece of paper. She unwrapped it and read it aloud. "You too, stinky Jew and Georgian. Get out of my country. Your place is in Siberia, or an oven would be even better." She looked at Vera. "We do not deserve this kind of treatment from each other, Vera. And we have to stop this fight. We need each other." Vera didn't answer and Betty left the room. Betty tried her hardest to comply with the unexpected requirements, but it was extremely hard and nerve-wracking. Betty's life was awful, though it was better than living in a kitchen closet with mice. It was May 9, 1946. Betty was in her room when she heard the doorbell, and then Vera talking to somebody unusually politely. "Betty, it's for you," she said shortly. "And I expect you to be quiet." There were 3 military men standing at the door. "Oh my God!" Betty cried out. Guys. I can't believe it. She hugged the men like they were her brothers as Vera watched silently. There were 2 pictures of young men dressed in the same kind of uniform standing on her bedstand. They looked so similar to these newcomers. She wanted to hug them and cry on their shoulders. She wanted to talk to them and listen to their stories forever. She wanted to cook them the chicken soup that her boys loved so much. She wanted them to comfort her, embracing her in their strong arms. She wanted. Happy holiday, sweetheart. Thanks. You too. Come on in. It's so good to see you. You too. How are you? Nick. You look much better than the last time I saw you. Thanks to you. You fixed me. Happy birthday to your Anna. This is for her. Another soldier gave her a toy. Oh, thank you so much, Vasil. She'll be so happy. Come to my room. Please. Later, 4 more military men came, and they all spent the entire night in Betty's room, talking and singing. They were loud, and Vera didn't sleep that night. Betty expected to fight with her again in the morning, but to her surprise, Vera was quiet. It was 1947, 2 long years after the war ended. One night, somebody knocked on the door. Betty listened as Vera opened it, and then yelled, "Go away. I don't have a place for orphans." The next moment, the door was slammed shut. Betty got out of her bed and walked outside her room. "Vera, who was it?" "I don't know. Some orphan asked for you. But you can't bring her here. My apartment is not an orphanage." Vera yelled. "It's enough for me to have you with your waif." She hatefully glanced at the door to Betty's room. "I told you, Vera. Watch your mouth," Betty said firmly. "I don't have to watch my mouth with a slut like you." Betty rushed out to the doorway. "Hey! Who are you?" she called to the dark figure, which was stepping downstairs, away from the apartment. "I'm Maya." "Maya. Oh my God." Betty ran downstairs and embraced Maya into her arms. She had grown up just a bit from the last time Betty had seen her in Aunt Ricky's apartment, and it felt like it was 100 years ago. "What are you doing here, Maya? What's happening to you?" "Aunt Ricky died," she cried. "They took her room and sent me to an orphanage." "Oh. Maya. I'm so sorry." Betty hugged the girl tight. "I have nobody to go to. I don't want to be in an orphanage. They beat me up all the time." Maya sobbed. "Oh. My dear, I'm starving there. Betty, please. Can I stay with you? I'll do your dishes. I'll clean your room," she begged. "Oh. My dear girl." Betty held her tight. "It's not my apartment, but I won't let you go. I swear. I'll think of something." They were standing in the middle of the darkness holding each other and crying. Betty had no idea what to do, but she knew that she would never let her go. She would never. Then, she had a thought. "You stay here. Okay. I'll be back. I have an idea. Just don't go anywhere. Don't move." Maya nodded as Betty disappeared into the apartment. In a couple of minutes, she came back with food and a couple of blankets. They went downstairs to the building basement. It was warm and dry because there was a heater there. Betty put the blankets together, making a bed for the girl, while Maya ate eagerly. "You stay here for now. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do. Okay?" "Yeah. You promise that you won't disappear in the morning?" "I promise." "Good. Because if you do, I'll be very upset. I love you, Maya. I'll find a way for us to be together." Maya nodded. Betty stayed with Maya until she fell into a deep sleep and then left. The next morning, while Anna was still asleep, Betty decided to check on Maya. She knocked on her door, to let Vera know that she was coming out of her room. Vera didn't answer as usual. Betty entered the living room. Vera was not there. It was very strange. Betty walked to the kitchen, made a snack for Maya, and went down the stairs to check on her. Maya was still there, sleeping. Betty left the snack right next to her and came back to the apartment. Something was not right. Vera never slept this late. The apartment was unusually quiet. Betty never entered Vera's bedroom, but this time she decided to break the rule. She knocked on the bedroom door and opened it. Vera was lying in her bed, unmoving, looking at Betty with wide-open eyes filled with fear. This look was so familiar to Betty. "Vera, are you okay?" she asked, getting inside. Vera produced some sound, but it was impossible to understand what she said. Nevertheless, Betty knew exactly what had happened to her. "Vera, I'm going to ask you a few questions. If the answer is yes, blink your eyes, and don't blink your eyes if the answer is no." Vera was emotional and murmured something, but nothing worked for her. "Vera, I'm not going to hurt you. Okay? Please don't be afraid of me. I'm your friend. I'll help you, if you want me to, or if you don't want me to help you, I'll call an ambulance. Now, blink your eyes, if you understood what I just said." Vera blinked her eyes. "Good. Can you move your right hand?" Vera didn't blink. "What about your left hand?" Vera lifted it a little. "Good. Do you see me well?" Vera didn't blink. "Are you dizzy?" Vera blinked. "Vera, you had a stroke. I can help you, if you want me to. I can call an ambulance if you don't want me to help you. But usually, they don't come for people of your age, or if they come, it might be too late. You might die. If I help you, you have a good chance to survive and get well. Vera, I have a nurse's diploma, but I have a doctor's experience, and I'm willing to help you. So, tell me, do you want me to help you?" Vera blinked. "Good." Betty was relieved. "Do you know what a stroke is, Vera?" She didn't blink. "Your artery is clogged, and the blood is not coming to your brain the way it should. This is why you can't talk and can't move. Your brain doesn't work properly without blood. I'm going to give you a shot to help your blood flow, and you'll feel a little better. Okay?" Vera blinked. Betty came back to Vera in a few minutes with medication. "Vera, later, you'll take aspirin on a regular basis. Also, regardless of how you feel, if you want to survive, you have to take it easy and stay in bed. I have a girl who is willing to take care of you, if you don't mind her living in my room temporarily. So tell me, if you don't mind." Vera blinked. Early in the morning, Betty was awoken by the sound of the doorbell. She opened her eyes and looked around. Maya was not in her bed. She is probably with Vera. Betty thought, and as confirmation of her thoughts, she heard as Maya opened the front door and asked, "Who are you?" "I'm looking for my wife," a man answered. During the Leningrad blockade, Lev drove a truck through Ladoga Lake, transporting people from Leningrad, and food to Leningrad. Then, he went all the way to Berlin with his battalion, as a truck driver, carrying the battalion cannon and soldiers in his truck. The war changed people, making friends like brothers, but also hardening their souls. Soldiers were different ages, nationalities, and backgrounds, but they all had a lot in common. They fought together, were ready to give their life for their soldier brothers, and almost all of them had losses in their families due to starvation, disease, or German occupation. Soldiers were there for each other, sharing their grief. They were so humane to each other that Lev was shocked to watch his soldier brothers when the battalion entered Berlin. Revenge drove a wave of mass murders, insults, and robberies. Lev watched his brother soldiers commit atrocious crimes, such as the torture of 2 old German women. They first stripped and raped them, and then cut their skin in a star shape on their backs. Then, they tied them together scornfully in a pose as if they had made love to each other, leaving them to die. They raped a young German woman in the most disgusting and brutal way, then raped her little baby girl, and let the baby bleed to death in front of her mother's eyes. Afterward, they enjoyed watching the young woman's slow and painful, agonizing death. They would use German women and children as targets in shooting competitions and would then force the survivors to fight to the death. The children were killed first and then the women. The victims cried something in German, making the brother soldiers angrier and thirstier for more German blood. It was hard to see his soldier brothers wounded, dismembered, or dead on battlefields, but it was harder to see them turning into ugly spectators who used women and children as gladiators. They were impossible to reason with. Not only did they kill without fear of punishment, but they also killed without fear of guilt. The war had turned them into serial killers and robbers in law. The battalion was dismissed from the army in only 2 long years after the end of the war. Soldiers started to fill Lev's truck with the trophies that they had taken from Germans' homes. Lev had no trophies and felt like an outsider. His brother soldiers made fun of him for coming home empty-handed, but he felt dirty doing what they did. Lev couldn't refuse to have their trophies in his truck, and drove them all the way to Leningrad. In the city, the soldiers unloaded the truck and left quickly, rushing home. However, there was one big bag left. Lev jumped into the truck to check it. The bag moved. Lev pulled his gun and waited alertly. The face of a boy appeared at the bag opening. "Who are you?" Lev asked loudly, pointing his gun at the boy. "Please. Don't shoot," the boy cried. "What are you doing here?" "I didn't want to stay in Germany. I wanted to go back home," the boy whimpered. "I hid here because nobody wanted to take me home." "All right then. Good thing I didn't shoot you." Lev put his gun away and helped the boy off the truck. "So, where do you go now?" "I don't know. I have nobody anymore. Maybe to Minsk, I lived there before the war." "Are you hungry?" "Yes." Lev pulled some bread from his bag and handed it to the boy. "Here." A soldier stood at the doorstep of Vera's apartment, holding a small suitcase in his left hand and a 14-year-old boy with his right hand. His shirt was covered with medals, and the heart under his shirt was filled with love and hope for a better future. Vera opened the door of her bedroom, slowly walked out, and stared at a beautiful military young man at the front door. A teardrop went down her cheek, he had such a resemblance to her boys. "I'm looking for my wife," he said. Betty ran to the front door. She stretched her hands, moving forward to hug him, when she saw the boy. "Sam." "Betty," and all 3 of them embraced each other and stood there for an eternity, sharing a long hug. Betty's eyes were watery. Sam was shining with happiness. Lev was searching for the right words to say. "I didn't want to fail to give you a son," he finally uttered, controlling his emotions, and looking into his talisman's eyes. "So, I brought him with me. I knew you wouldn't mind." "Oh. Dear. I don't. My name is Lev," he said, giving Vera his hand. "Vera," she answered, slowly taking a couple of steps forward and uncertainly stretching out her hand. "It's very nice to meet you, Vera." Lev smiled widely. "Talisman wrote me about you." "Who is Talisman?" Vera was surprised. "Talisman is my wife, Betty." He hugged his wife. "She told me that you don't have a family. So, I thought that we would need a grandma because we are going to have a lot of babies. Aren't we?" He lifted his wife in his hands as she was shining with happiness. Vera smiled. "That would be a perfect idea."